Stand in the Forum of Pompeii today and you can see the ruts carved by wooden cartwheels into 2,000-year-old stone. More than 2 million tourists walk these streets each year, making Pompeii the third most visited archaeological site in Italy after the Colosseum and the Vatican. But rewind 1945 years, and you would have found 20,000 Romans shopping for fish sauce, arguing over election graffiti, and eating hot food from thermopolar counters, utterly unaware they had hours to live. Frozen mid-sentence, frozen mid-bite, frozen mid-scream. Using cutting-edge AI reconstruction, we are about to walk you through every century of Pompeii's story. From its Oscan foundations in the 7th century BC to the plaster cast bodies you can visit today. Pompeii did not begin as a Roman city. The first settlement appeared around 600 BC on a prehistoric lava plateau overlooking the Sarno River, built by the Oscans, an Italic people whose language survives today only in inscriptions and curse tablets. The Oscans chose this site for two reasons. The volcanic soil produced wine grapes of astonishing sweetness, and the river mouth provided access to Mediterranean trade routes. By 525 BC, Greek merchants from Cumae had begun building stone temples on Pompeii's eastern ridge, introducing the Doric column and the worship of Apollo. The city's first forum took shape, a rectangular marketplace lined with tufa stone colonnades where Oscan farmers sold amphorae of garum, the fermented fish sauce that would make Pompeii wealthy. In 474 BC, the Etruscans attempted to seize control of Campania, besieging Pompeii's walls with bronze-armored hoplites. The siege failed. Pompeii remained Oscan, but Greek architectural influence deepened. By 420 BC, the city had expanded to 66 hectares, surrounded by limestone walls 2 miles in circumference with 7 gates. The Samnites, a mountain people from the Apennines, swept down into the plain in 400 BC, conquering Pompeii without destroying it. They adopted the city's grid plan, its Greek temples, its profitable garum trade. For the next 3 centuries, Pompeii would remain a Samnite city, speaking Oscan, worshipping Greek gods, and growing rich on wine and fish sauce. Rome came to Pompeii in blood. In 310 BC, Roman legions marched through Campania during the Second Samnite War, burning villas and vineyards. Pompeii submitted, becoming a Roman ally but retaining its Oscan language and self-government. For 2 centuries, the city thrived in this hybrid state, Samnite in culture, Roman in military obligation. Pompeian soldiers fought alongside Rome against Pyrrhus of Epirus in 280 BC and against Hannibal in 216 BC, when the Carthaginian general marched through Campania, slaughtering livestock and torching grain stores. Pompeii remained loyal to Rome. The reward was prosperity. By 150 BC, the city's population had reached 15,000. Wealthy merchants built atrium houses with frescoed walls depicting scenes from Homer. The amphitheatre, the oldest surviving stone amphitheatre in the Roman world, was constructed in 70 BC, seating 20,000 spectators for gladiatorial games funded by magistrates seeking election. But loyalty had limits. In 91 BC, the social war erupted when Rome's Italian allies demanded citizenship. Pompei joined the rebellion. Roman siege engines appeared outside the Herculaneum Gate in 89 BC, commanded by Sulla himself. Stone ballista balls smashed into the city walls. Archaeologists have recovered them, still embedded in the volcanic stone. Pompeii surrendered after a brief siege. Sulla was merciful. He did not massacre the population. Instead, he planted a Roman colony inside the walls, settling veterans of his legions in confiscated houses and renaming the city Colonia Cornelia Veneria Pompeianorum. The Oscan language began to fade. Latin inscriptions appeared on public buildings. The Temple of Jupiter in the Forum was rededicated to the Capitoline Triad. Pompeii was no longer Samnite. It was Roman. The 1st century AD was Pompeii's golden age. Under Augustus, the city's population swelled to 20,000. The Forum was rebuilt in gleaming white marble, surrounded by a 2-story colonnade. The Temple of Fortuna Augusta rose on the northern edge of the Forum, funded by Marcus Tullius, a wealthy magistrate who paid for the entire structure out of his own pocket to secure election as duumvir. The Stabian baths were expanded with heated floors and cold plunge pools lined with blue frescoes of swimming dolphins. Wealthy Romans built seaside villas along Pompeii's western edge, where they could watch the sun set over the Bay of Naples while enslaved workers served mullet in garum sauce. The Casa del Fauno, the House of the Faun, covered an entire city block, featuring a bronze dancing satyr in its atrium and the famous Alexander mosaic depicting the Battle of Issus, composed of more than 1 million colored tesserae. The city's economy rested on wine and wool. Pompeii's vineyards produced a wine so prized that amphorae marked with Pompeian seals have been found in Gaul, Britannia, and Egypt. The city's Fuloniki, wool processing workshops, employed hundreds of workers who washed togas in human urine collected from public urinals, then bleached them with sulfur fumes. The amphitheater hosted games every spring. In AD 59, a riot erupted during a gladiatorial match between Pompeii and the neighboring city of Nuceria. Pompeian spectators attacked Nucerian visitors with stones and iron seat supports, killing dozens. The Roman Senate banned gladiatorial games in Pompeii for 10 years. The ban was lifted early. The city's wealthy families donated too much money to the imperial treasury to be punished for long. By AD 62, Pompeii had reached the peak of its architectural splendor. The Forum was surrounded by temples to Jupiter, Apollo, Venus, and Vespasian. The Macellum, the meat and fish market, sold oysters from Britannia and dates from Judea. The Via dell'Abbondanza, Pompeii's main commercial street, was lined with thermopolia, bakeries, tsesuts, and brothels. Electoral graffiti covered every wall, urging citizens to vote for Gaius Julius Polybius, for Adile, or Marcus Hulconius Priscus, for Duumvir. In the tiny rooms above the shops, prostitutes carved their names and prices into the plaster. Novellia Primigenia, 2 asses. The city was loud, crowded, cosmopolitan, filthy, and alive. February 5, AD 62. A massive earthquake struck Pompeii at noon, collapsing roofs, toppling columns, and splitting the Forum pavement into jagged cracks. The tremor lasted long enough for people to run screaming into the streets, where falling roof tiles killed dozens. The Temple of Jupiter lost its entire pediment. The Temple of Isis cracked down the middle. The aqueduct feeding Pompeii's public fountains ruptured, cutting off the city's water supply for months. A marble relief carved shortly after the earthquake shows the Forum's temples tilting at impossible angles while household gods tumble from their shrines. Modern seismologists estimate the quake at magnitude 5.9, centered directly beneath Vesuvius. The Romans did not connect earthquakes with volcanic activity. They blamed the gods. In the aftermath, Pompeii began a frantic reconstruction campaign. Wealthy families competed to fund temple repairs, seeking divine favor and public prestige. The Temple of Isis was completely rebuilt by Numerius Papidius Celsinus, a 6-year-old boy whose father paid for the restoration to secure his son's admission to the city council despite being a freedman. The house of the Vettii brothers, freedmen who had made a fortune in wine and banking, was redecorated with the most extravagant frescoes in the city, showing Priapus weighing his enormous phallus against a bag of gold coins. But 17 years later, much of Pompeii remained under repair. The Temple of Jupiter still lacked its roof. The amphitheater's upper tiers were closed. Scaffolding covered half the buildings on the Via dell'Abbondanza. The city's inhabitants had grown accustomed to tremors. Small earthquakes rattled Pompeii almost daily in the months before August AD 79. Nobody fled. They had survived the Great Quake of AD 62. They would survive these too. August 24, AD 79, shortly after noon. Mount Vesuvius exploded with a roar that shattered windows in Misenum, 20 miles away. A column of superheated ash and pumice shot 9 miles into the stratosphere, spreading into the mushroom cloud shape that Pliny the Younger would later compare to an umbrella pine. Pompeii lay 4 miles southeast of the crater, directly downwind. Within minutes, white pumice stones began falling on the city like hail, accumulating on rooftops at a rate of 6 inches per hour. The sky turned black. People ran into the streets carrying pillows tied to their heads with cloth strips. Archaeologists have found the fossilized remains. Some fled immediately, heading south on the road to Stabiae or west toward the harbor. Most stayed in their homes, sheltering under staircases or in ground-floor rooms, waiting for the eruption to stop. It did not stop. For 12 hours, pumice rained down, collapsing roofs, burying streets, filling the forum to a depth of 9 feet. Around midnight, the eruption entered its second phase. The eruption column collapsed, sending a pyroclastic surge, a ground-hugging avalanche of superheated gas and ash moving at 60 miles per hour down Vesuvius's western slope. The first surge reached Herculaneum at 1:30 a.m., incinerating the 2,000 people huddled in the boathouses at the ancient shoreline. Their bodies carbonized instantly, flash-heated to 500 degrees Celsius. At Pompeii, the surges arrived at dawn. The first surge jumped over Pompeii's walls, filling the streets with a 100-degree cloud of ash and toxic gas. People who had survived the pumice fall died of asphyxiation or thermal shock within seconds. The second surge, arriving at 7:30 a.m., buried the city completely, entombing bodies in 6 feet of fine grey ash. Pliny the Younger watched from across the bay as the cloud rolled down the mountain like a flood. His uncle, Pliny the Elder, commander of the Roman fleet at Misenum, had sailed toward Pompeii the previous afternoon to rescue friends. He died on the beach at Stabiae, suffocated by toxic fumes. By midday on August 25th, Pompeii had vanished. 2,000 people died in the city, their bodies preserved in the ash as cavities that archaeologists would later fill with plaster to create the famous casts. The man covering his mouth, the dog twisting on its chain, the pregnant woman curled on her side. The family huddled together in a final embrace. For 3 days after the eruption, survivors dug through the ash, searching for relatives and valuables. Tunnels have been found in the hardened pumice layer, some reaching deep into buried houses before stopping abruptly, perhaps when toxic gas drove the diggers back. By September, organized salvage efforts had ceased. The Roman government wrote Pompeii off as a total loss. The city's surviving inhabitants were resettled in Neapolis and Puteoli. Pompeii's name disappeared from maps. Within a generation, the city's exact location was forgotten. Grass grew over the ash field. Farmers planted vineyards, unaware that Roman streets lay 20 feet beneath their roots. For 16 centuries, Pompeii remained buried. Medieval peasants occasionally unearthed marble fragments while ploughing fields and sold them to lime burners, who crushed ancient statues into building mortar. In 1594, the architect Domenico Fontana dug a tunnel for an aqueduct and broke through into a Pompeian villa, uncovering frescoes and inscriptions. He reburied the site without investigating further. The modern rediscovery began in 1748 when the Spanish engineer Roque Joaquín de Alcubierre, working for King Charles III of Naples, excavated the Temple of Isis, finding perfectly preserved frescoes and bronze statues. The excavations proceeded chaotically. Workers smashed through walls with pickaxes, hunting for statues and gold jewelry to fill the royal collection. Frescoes too damaged to remove were left to decay. In 1860, Giuseppe Fiorelli was appointed director of excavations and revolutionized the process, creating the plaster cast technique and establishing the systematic uncovering of entire city blocks rather than treasure-hunting tunnels. By 1900, 2/3 of Pompeii had been exposed to daylight. Stand in the Garden of the Fugitives today, and you can see 13 plaster casts lying exactly where they died, twisted in their final agony. The casts are not bodies, but negative spaces in the ash, hollow molds of vanished flesh filled with liquid plaster in 1961. Their clothes, their hair, their expressions, all preserved in volcanic glass. 75% of Pompeii remains unexcavated, buried beneath modern Pompeii city and protected by Italian law from further digging to preserve the site for future technologies. The city that took 8 centuries to build and one day to destroy continues to teach us about Roman life with a specificity found nowhere else. The price of bread chalked on a bakery wall, the love letters scratched into plaster, the bodies frozen mid-step. A city that refused to die. Pompeii speaks.